They say the most dangerous dagger is not the one you see, but the one disguised as a gentle hand resting on your shoulder. This is the paradox empaths live with every day. The same love that warms them often carries the chill of betrayal hidden beneath its surface. It is not always the obvious enemy who drains their light. More often, it is the friend who claps too loudly, the partner who whispers encouragement but secretly counts your steps, the family member who smiles yet keeps their jealousy buried in silence. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." For empaths, this truth cuts deep. The unconscious of others often spills into their lives, not as love, but as envy, resentment, and competition dressed up in affection. And because empaths feel everything so vividly, they become mirrors, reflecting not just admiration but also the shadows people hide from themselves. Imagine the ancient Greek stage. Actors wore masks, bright and smiling for the audience, while behind the curtain their real faces could be weary, bitter, or broken. Life still plays out this way today. Many who claim to love an empath wear masks of loyalty, but behind them grows a silent storm. They cannot bear the empath's light because it reveals their own darkness. They cannot embrace the empath's authenticity because it highlights their own falsehoods. An empath doesn't try to provoke envy. They simply exist. Their depth makes shallow love feel counterfeit. Their honesty makes pretenders uncomfortable. Their compassion awakens the guilt of those who only pretend to care. To be near an empath is to face a truth many would rather keep hidden. Love without authenticity is just performance. This is why betrayal feels so personal to empaths. They don't just lose a friend or a partner. They lose the illusion that someone ever truly loved them. The wound cuts deeper, not because of the dagger, but because it came from the very hand they trusted. And this is where dark psychology begins to weave its threads. Affection as camouflage, closeness as a weapon, and envy as the silent poison beneath the smile. The introduction to this journey is not meant to cast empaths as victims, but as truth-bearers. To understand why empaths trigger envy in those who pretend to love them, we must first unmask the double face of affection. Every mask tells a story, every false smile hides a shadow, and every empath who walks into a room unknowingly lights up both admiration and jealousy at the same time. So, let us begin where all stories of love and betrayal start, at the mask. The stage is set, the characters appear warm and kind, but in the cracks of the mask, envy waits, ready to reveal itself. And for the empath, this revelation is not just about others. It is about learning to see through the masks without losing faith in love itself. There is a strange phenomenon that happens whenever an empath enters the room. They don't have to speak. They don't have to assert themselves. Simply by existing, they become a quiet storm, a mirror too clear, a presence too real. And this is precisely why fragile egos begin to tremble. Think of a candle lit in a dusty attic. The flame is not aggressive. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. Yet its very light exposes every cobweb, every forgotten stain, every corner that was once hidden in the dark. The candle has no agenda, but those who prefer the comfort of darkness suddenly feel naked, seen, and unsettled. This is what happens when fragile egos face an empath. They see themselves in ways they never wanted to. Carl Jung explained it with piercing clarity. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But fragile egos are not ready for understanding. They resist the mirror. They resist the reflection. And so, instead of admitting their insecurities, they redirect them, turning admiration into envy and envy into subtle acts of sabotage. Here lies the paradox. Empaths are not competitors. They are not climbing over others to prove superiority. Yet their mere existence, their authenticity, their ability to feel and connect, makes others feel insufficient. A fragile ego interprets empathy as threat, sensitivity as judgment, kindness as superiority. The empath is not trying to win, but their light makes someone else feel like they are losing. Picture a workplace where an empath listens deeply to colleagues, remembering small details others forget. While most interact with transactional words, the empath asks, "How are you, really?" In that simple question, some feel valued, but others, they feel exposed because they never intended to be seen that clearly. And so, resentment takes root in the shadow, cloaked beneath polite smiles. Or imagine an intimate relationship where an empath notices subtle changes in tone, mood, or silence. While most would overlook these details, the empath senses the storm long before the thunder breaks. Their awareness feels like intrusion to those who prefer to hide. Their ability to sense dishonesty feels like accusation to those who rely on lies. The empath does not accuse, but the fragile ego feels accused simply by being near truth. Dark psychology reveals that envy is rarely about what the other person has. It is about what the other person awakens inside us. For fragile egos, the empath awakens the shadow, the denied self, the suppressed weakness, the unresolved wound. And rather than face the shadow, the fragile ego lashes out at the mirror that reflects it. It is easier to resent the empath than to heal the wound. Jung would call this projection, the act of throwing one's own denied qualities onto someone else. The fragile ego whispers, "It's not me who is insecure, it's you who makes me feel small." And so, the empath becomes the villain in someone else's inner play, a scapegoat for emotions that were never theirs to carry. But here is the hidden danger. Empaths often believe it is their fault. They ask themselves, "Did I do something wrong? Did I push too far? Did I love too much?" The truth is simpler and harsher. Fragile egos collapse not because of what the empath does, but because of what the empath reveals. The candle cannot apologize for shining. And so, without trying, empaths threaten fragile egos. They threaten the comfort of masks, the illusion of stability, the fragile architecture of self-deception. They don't need to fight. Their presence alone forces the shadow into view. And those who cannot bear their own reflection will always feel an empath as a threat. All you need is love. The Beatles sang it as a universal truth, an anthem of hope that still echoes through generations. But here's the paradox. For empaths, love is not always the cure. Sometimes, it is the camouflage. Sometimes, the very thing they are told to trust, affection, closeness, intimacy, becomes the weapon that wounds them most deeply. It sounds almost heretical to say that love can be dangerous. And yet, what if the words "I care about you" are spoken not from sincerity, but from envy in disguise? What if the warm embrace is less about connection and more about control? For empaths, this is not theory, it is lived reality. The hardest betrayals are not from strangers who openly despise them, but from people who pretend to love them while secretly resenting their light. Imagine a chessboard. Every move seems calculated, every piece positioned with care. The player smiles, says, "I just want the best for you." But behind that smile lies intention. Their affection is not about you. It's about where they can move next, what they can gain, how they can keep you from noticing the checkmate they are planning. For empaths, this kind of false affection is poison, because they drink it sincerely, not realizing it was laced with envy all along. Dark psychology has a term for this: weaponized affection. It happens when kindness, compliments, and even intimacy are used as tools of control. The partner who showers you with praise when you're weak, but grows distant when you succeed. The friend who comforts you in failure but grows silent in your triumph. The colleague who flatters you in meetings but undermines you when no one is watching. This isn't love, it's envy wearing perfume, sabotage dressed in silk. Carl Jung warned that what is unconscious seeks expression, even if it disguises itself. A person who cannot face their envy will not simply confess it. They will bury it beneath gestures of closeness. The unconscious finds ways to slip through. A compliment that carries hidden bitterness. A hug that feels strangely hollow. A smile that never reaches the eyes. To the empath, who feels everything, these contradictions sting like splinters under the skin. Consider the story of Anna, a gifted empath who once confided in her closest friend about a dream project. Her friend's response: Enthusiastic support, promises of encouragement, a wide smile. But weeks later, when Anna finally achieved the first milestone, the same friend offered faint praise, quickly changing the subject to their own problems. Later still, Anna discovered subtle rumors had been spread about her, not by an enemy, but by that very friend who had once promised loyalty. This is the cruelty of fake love. It doesn't stab in the front. It poisons slowly from behind. Psychologists describe this as cognitive dissonance in relationships. The fake affection creates confusion in the empath's mind. They think, if they support me here, why do I feel resistance there? If they love me, why does it hurt when I succeed? The confusion is deliberate. It destabilizes. It makes the empath question their own perception, their own intuition, an erosion of self that benefits only the one who envies. But there is another layer. Empaths, by nature, want to believe in love. They would rather excuse the contradiction than face the painful truth that someone close to them pretends. So they rationalize. Maybe they are just stressed. Maybe I misunderstood. And in doing so, they allow the cycle to continue. This is why fake love is so dangerous. It uses the empath's own compassion against them. Jung would say this is the shadow at play, the part of someone that cannot accept their own envy, so it dresses up in virtue. But shadows always leak. They reveal themselves in micro-moments, eye rolls during victories, withheld applause, backhanded compliments. The empath notices, even if they don't want to admit it. The body feels what the mind denies. To see through fake love is not about becoming cynical. It is about learning to trust the dissonance inside. If the affection you receive feels heavy, conditional, or strangely hollow, it is not love, it is a transaction. And for empaths, the greatest act of self-protection is to stop paying with their own soul. Fake love alone is not enough to keep envy hidden. For it to work, it needs rules, silent rules, invisible agreements that the empath never consciously accepts but somehow feels bound by. The manipulator doesn't just offer affection as a disguise. They set conditions beneath it. Unspoken terms, like footnotes written in invisible ink. I'll stay close, as long as your light doesn't outshine mine. I'll support you, but only if your growth never threatens me. And this is where we step into the psychology of what I call the shadow contract. It is not written, not spoken, yet it governs the relationship as surely as any signed document. While fake love is the mask, the shadow contract is the leash, the hidden agreement that keeps the empath contained, apologetic, and doubting their own brilliance. Not all contracts are written on paper. Some are signed in silence, with no ink, no handshake, no words spoken aloud. They live in the shadow, binding two people together in an invisible agreement neither one fully acknowledges. For empaths, these shadow contracts are especially dangerous because they are forged without their consent, yet they shape the dynamics of their relationships. The unspoken contract often goes like this: I will pretend to love you as long as you never outshine me. Or, I will stand by your side as long as your success does not exceed mine. At first glance, the bond seems real, but beneath it lies a condition, an invisible clause. Your light must not grow too bright, your truth must not expose my shadow. The empath doesn't know they have signed such a contract, but they pay the price every time they choose compassion over confrontation. Carl Jung described this dynamic through the lens of projection. When a person refuses to face their own shadow, envy, insecurity, resentment, they project it onto another. The empath becomes the container, carrying emotions that never belong to them. They feel guilty for shining, ashamed for succeeding, apologetic for simply being themselves. The contract is not spoken, yet it dictates the terms. You may exist, but only within the limits I can tolerate. Consider a story. Michael, an empathic musician, often shared his work with his closest circle. One friend praised him endlessly in private, but during group gatherings, that same friend grew strangely dismissive, making subtle jokes about Michael's art. It was as if the contract whispered, "I will support you in private, but in public, you cannot surpass me." Michael felt the sting of betrayal, yet he doubted himself, wondering if he was imagining things. That is the cruel genius of the shadow contract. It thrives in silence, leaving the empath unsure if it even exists. In romantic relationships, the contract can sound like, "I love you, but only if you remain dependent on me." An empath's growth, independence, or self-actualization breaks the unspoken deal, and suddenly affection turns cold, distant, or even hostile. It is not that love vanishes. It was never love to begin with. It was a pact of control dressed up as intimacy. Dark psychology explains this as conditional attachment, a bond maintained not for love, but for leverage. The one holding the contract seeks control, not connection. They thrive on the empath's openness but fear their strength. And so, they create rules that keep the empath contained. Invisible rules, but rules nonetheless. Here lies the most painful part. Empaths often sense these contracts but ignore their intuition. They convince themselves, "Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is normal." But the body knows when a contract has been signed against its will. It feels it in the hesitation before speaking truth. It feels it in the shrinking of one's own light to protect someone else's comfort. It feels it in the heaviness of relationships that demand silence instead of authenticity. Jung would remind us that freedom begins with awareness. The moment the contract is named, it loses power. The empath can say, "I will not carry your envy. I will not shrink to protect your pride. I will not live under terms I never agreed to." Breaking a shadow contract is painful because it often means losing the bond altogether. But the alternative is worse, living in chains that were never visible, but always real. To see the contract is the first act of liberation. To refuse to honor it is the second. And for empaths, this courage is not just survival, it is the reclaiming of their own story. Because the truth is simple, any relationship that demands you to dim your light is not love, it is bondage. And no shadow contract can bind a soul that chooses authenticity over pretense. There is a haunting question many empaths ask themselves. Why does this keep happening to me? Different faces, different names, different seasons of life, but the same betrayal repeats. It is as if the universe keeps sending the same test in different packaging, until the lesson is finally learned. And after enough repetitions, betrayal stops feeling like coincidence and begins to feel like destiny. Imagine a river carving its way through stone. At first, it seems random, chaotic, aimless. But with time, you notice a pattern. The water always finds the cracks, always returns to the same pathways, until the stone itself bears the memory of every stream. In the same way, the empath's life can feel etched with the memory of recurring betrayals. It is not weakness that draws them in, it is resonance. The unconscious is repeating itself, seeking resolution. Carl Jung explained this as the compulsion to repeat. What is unhealed in the psyche reemerges again and again, dressed in new relationships and new circumstances. For the empath, betrayal is not just an external act, it becomes the mirror of their inner wound. The part of them that longs for unconditional love unconsciously attracts those who offer conditional love. The part of them that believes they must give without limits attracts those who are eager to take. Until the pattern is seen, it feels like fate. Consider the story of Sandra Bullock, one of America's most beloved actresses. In 2010, just days after winning the Academy Award, a moment that should have been her pure triumph, the world discovered that her husband had been unfaithful. At the very height of her success, betrayal struck like lightning. The contrast could not have been sharper. Public adoration on one side, private devastation on the other. For many empaths, Sandra's story feels painfully familiar. They may not win Oscars, but they know the pattern: to give love, loyalty, and trust, only to be met with envy, deception, and betrayal. Different faces, different names, but the same wound reappears. And like Sandra, they are left asking, why does this keep happening? Is betrayal my destiny? Dark psychology helps us see that those who envy are often drawn to empaths precisely because they sense an opportunity. The empath's openness looks like a doorway. Their compassion feels like free access. And envy, being insatiable, rushes in to fill the space. But the pattern continues only as long as the empath believes they are powerless against it. The moment they recognize the cycle, they begin to write a new script. Betrayal feels like destiny because it wounds the same place every time, the tender spot that longs to be seen, loved, and valued. And when the wound is unacknowledged, the psyche seems to say, "Here it is again. Will you face it this time?" Jung would call this individuation, the process of integrating what was once hidden into conscious awareness. For empaths, individuation often begins with betrayal. The pain forces them to ask not just why me, but what in me keeps repeating this pattern. This is not to say betrayal is ever deserved. It is not. But patterns persist when they remain invisible. The empath's gift, and curse, is that they feel so deeply that each repetition cuts like the first. Yet it is also their gift that, when they finally face the pattern, they can transform it into wisdom, boundaries, and inner strength. Think of the phoenix, consumed by fire only to rise again from ashes. For the empath, betrayal is the fire. It feels final, devastating, cruel. But it is also the doorway into transformation. Each betrayal whispers, "See me, break me, rewrite me." And when the empath listens, they discover betrayal was never destiny, it was initiation. The universe does not conspire to break them. It conspires to wake them. And once awakened, the empath no longer carries betrayal as fate but as proof. Proof of resilience, proof of growth, proof that even the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound light. Betrayal may feel like the final chapter, but for empaths, it can also be the beginning of a new story. The cycle of envy, fake love, and shadow contracts is not unbreakable. It is a mirror. And once the mirror is recognized, it no longer distorts. It becomes a map, pointing the empath back to their own strength. Think of alchemy, the ancient practice of turning lead into gold. Envy is the lead, heavy, toxic, and dull. But through awareness and transformation, empaths can turn that lead into the gold of inner power. This is not about denying the pain of betrayal, nor about pretending the envy of others does not wound. It is about using those wounds as catalysts, as raw material for growth. The very energy meant to break them becomes the fire that forges resilience. Carl Jung believed individuation was the path to wholeness, the integration of shadow and light. For empaths, individuation begins when they stop internalizing other people's envy as their own flaw. They realize, I am not wrong for being sensitive. I am not guilty for shining. Their envy is not my burden. It is their shadow, not mine. This shift is revolutionary. It is the moment an empath moves from victimhood to mastery. Dark psychology reveals that manipulation thrives where there are no boundaries. The antidote, then, is clarity. A gentle no spoken daily. A pause before overgiving. A willingness to let go of those who only love conditionally. These are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of self-preservation. For empaths, boundaries are not walls. They are roots gripping the rock, keeping them steady in the storm. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For empaths, this privilege arrives when they stop shrinking to fit into shadow contracts, when they stop mistaking fake love for real love, when they stop carrying envy that never belonged to them. They step fully into themselves, not in arrogance, but in authenticity. And that authenticity is their shield, their strength, their freedom. So the cycle breaks not with vengeance, but with awareness. Not with retaliation, but with resilience. And in that breaking, empaths discover the deepest truth. They were never destined for betrayal. They were destined for transformation. The envy that once haunted them becomes proof of their light. The betrayal that once crushed them becomes the soil where their roots dig deeper. And from those roots, they rise, stronger, clearer, unshakable. If this journey resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of fake love, the weight of hidden envy, or the courage it takes to rise again, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you've recognized or broken these patterns in your own life. And if you found value here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss our deep dives into psychology, empathy, and the hidden patterns that shape our lives.